It began with laughter so cruel that even the birds seemed to scatter from the sound. As the county officials signed over a barren, rock-covered hill that no one wanted, people stood in broad daylight pointing, smirking, and whispering that the land would bury another dream before the year was over. 3 years later, when relentless drought burned the valleys into dust and raging floodwaters swept away the richest fields in the county, every road led to one impossible sight: the only thriving farm stood proudly on that forgotten rocky hill they had mocked, and the same people who once laughed now stood silently at its gates with tears in their eyes. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue growing together through stories that remind us never to give up on people. 18-year-old Weston Hale had grown up knowing exactly what it meant to inherit disappointment. His father had passed away after years of struggling to keep rented farmland productive, while his mother, Clara, spent every daylight hour working wherever she could to keep food on the table. Weston never complained, even when classmates laughed at his worn boots or when neighbors quietly pitied the family for always standing one bad season away from losing everything. What hurt him most was not poverty itself but watching his mother pretend she was not hungry whenever there was only enough food for one of them. Every promise he silently made to himself centered on giving her a life where she no longer had to hide her sacrifices behind a tired smile. When the county announced that abandoned public land would be distributed to encourage new farmers, hope briefly entered Weston's heart. He imagined receiving a modest patch of fertile soil where hard work could finally matter. Instead, after every decent parcel had been claimed, the officials handed him the last remaining property almost as an afterthought. It was a steep rocky hill littered with loose stone, stubborn weeds, shallow soil, and cracked earth that had defeated every previous owner. Some people openly joked that the county should have apologized instead of presenting him with the deed. Others laughed that even goats would refuse to live there. Weston thanked the officials anyway, folded the worn document carefully into his pocket, and climbed the hill before anyone else could see the tears gathering in his eyes. The first time Clara walked across the property, she struggled to hide her heartbreak. Stones covered nearly every step. Rainwater had carved deep channels through the hillside over decades, carrying away precious topsoil until little remained. Even the scattered grass looked exhausted. Yet Weston surprised her by kneeling down, picking up a rough gray rock, and turning it slowly in his hands as though studying a valuable treasure. He quietly realized something that most people never noticed. Every heavy rain rushed off the hill so quickly that nothing soaked into the ground. Every dry spell baked the exposed surface into concrete. The land was not cursed. It was simply wounded. From that day forward, every sunrise became another chance to heal the hill instead of fighting against it. Weston hauled stones one wheelbarrow at a time, stacking them into carefully built terraces that slowed the flow of water. He dug shallow swales that gently followed the shape of the hillside, allowing rain to sink deep instead of escaping downhill. Fallen branches became barriers that trapped leaves. Compost came from restaurant scraps, stable manure, and every handful of organic material people were willing to throw away. While others laughed at the sight of him collecting waste, Weston saw future soil where everyone else saw garbage. The work demanded patience beyond imagination. Progress could not be measured by harvests because there were almost none at first. Instead, success came in tiny victories. A worm appeared beneath a stone where none had lived before. Wildflowers unexpectedly bloomed between terraces. Bees began visiting patches that had once been lifeless. Every small sign reminded Weston that nature always rewarded persistence, even when people refused to. Many neighbors continued mocking him. They drove past in broad daylight shaking their heads, insisting he was wasting the strongest years of his life on impossible ground. Some advised him to abandon the hill before debt consumed him. Others suggested finding factory work and forgetting farming forever. Weston never answered with anger. He simply smiled politely before returning to another load of rocks. Quiet determination became his loudest reply. One elderly widow named Eleanor Mercer watched his work differently. Her late husband had once believed healthy soil mattered more than expensive machinery, and she recognized that same respect in Weston. Every few days she brought him homemade bread, fruit, or seeds collected from old family gardens. She never offered pity. Instead, she offered encouragement rooted in genuine belief. Her kindness reminded Weston that hope often arrived through ordinary people rather than dramatic miracles. By the second growing season, the hill looked different. It was still rocky, but now ribbons of green curved around its slopes. Fruit trees stood protected by stone circles that held moisture. Native grasses strengthened fragile ground. Deep-rooted plants loosened compacted earth while clover quietly restored nitrogen. Instead of forcing the land to become something unnatural, Weston worked with its character. The hill slowly transformed from an enemy into a partner. People noticed but remained skeptical. They admitted the property looked prettier than before, yet few believed beauty could become survival. Wealthier farmers invested heavily in irrigation systems and larger equipment, convinced that bigger harvests always required bigger spending. Weston invested mostly in healthy soil capable of storing every drop of rain that reached it. Then came the year no one would ever forget. Spring arrived unusually dry. Week after week passed beneath bright daytime skies without meaningful rainfall. Streams narrowed into trickles. Ponds shrank. Corn leaves curled under relentless heat. Pastures turned brittle and brown. Farmers who had always enjoyed rich bottomland watched helplessly as their crops withered despite expensive irrigation. Wells began producing less water each week. Across the county, panic spread like wildfire. Families gathered beneath scorching sunlight wondering how they would survive another month without rain. Bank loans suddenly felt impossible to repay. Livestock grew thinner. Entire fields died before reaching maturity. Weston climbed his rocky terraces every morning expecting disaster, yet something astonishing happened. His crops remained green. The terraces trapped every light shower that fell. Organic matter built over years acted like giant sponges beneath the surface. Tree roots reached deep moisture reserves untouched by shallow-rooted crops elsewhere. Thick mulch shaded the soil, preventing precious water from evaporating beneath the relentless sun. People initially dismissed it as luck. Then the drought intensified. Fields surrounding the hill turned completely brown, but Weston's vegetables, fruit trees, grains, and grazing areas continued producing food. Not perfectly, not abundantly beyond imagination, but steadily enough to feed families. Instead of locking his gates, Weston invited struggling neighbors to gather produce at reduced prices or, when they truly had nothing left, without charge at all. Clara quietly worried they could not afford such generosity, yet Weston reminded her that hunger never asked whether someone deserved compassion. His decision spread throughout the county. Families who had once laughed while receiving entertainment from his struggles now accepted vegetables with trembling gratitude. Pride dissolved beneath empty stomachs. Weston never reminded anyone of their earlier cruelty. He simply filled baskets and wished them strength. Then, just as hope cautiously returned, the weather shifted with terrifying speed. Weeks of blazing sunshine ended beneath massive storm clouds that rolled across the sky during broad daylight. Rain poured harder than anyone remembered. Rivers burst beyond their banks. Fields stripped bare by drought could not absorb the sudden floodwaters. Rich topsoil disappeared downstream. Fences collapsed. Machinery became trapped beneath deep mud. Acres of carefully planted crops vanished beneath rushing brown water. People feared Weston would finally lose everything because steep hills usually suffered worst during floods. Instead, his farm stood firm. The terraces slowed the rushing water. Swales captured enormous amounts of rainfall before overflow gently continued downhill. Deep roots anchored the soil. Stone walls held the slopes together. Instead of washing away, the hillside absorbed life-giving moisture exactly as Weston had planned years earlier while everyone else laughed. News spread faster than the flood itself. Farmers arrived expecting devastation but found flourishing orchards, healthy gardens, and intact soil. Children who had once repeated jokes they heard from adults now stared in amazement at butterflies dancing above flowers growing where bare rock had once dominated the landscape. County officials returned carrying expressions entirely different from those they wore years earlier. They admitted they had considered the property worthless. They asked Weston to explain every method he had used because communities desperately needed solutions before more farms disappeared forever. Weston agreed on one condition. Every workshop would be free for anyone willing to learn regardless of wealth, experience, or previous opinions. Hundreds attended. Instead of boasting about personal success, Weston patiently demonstrated simple principles almost anyone could apply. Healthy soil stored water. Diversity strengthened resilience. Working with nature usually succeeded where fighting against it failed. Expensive equipment could never permanently replace living ecosystems. The lessons transformed more than farmland. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another during prosperous years now cooperated on erosion projects. Families shared tools instead of competing. Teenagers volunteered weekends building terraces for elderly landowners unable to perform heavy labor. The county slowly rediscovered community through shared hardship. Months later, agricultural researchers visited the hill. They measured soil health, water retention, biodiversity, and crop performance. Their reports attracted environmental organizations, sustainable farming groups, and universities eager to understand how one neglected hillside had become the region's strongest agricultural example. Grants followed. Educational tours filled the narrow road leading to Weston's property. Newspapers praised the remarkable recovery, but Weston always redirected attention toward the lesson rather than himself. He insisted the hill had never been worthless. Only misunderstood. One afternoon beneath warm sunlight, Weston walked beside Eleanor Mercer through orchards buzzing with bees. She smiled as children explored pathways lined with flowers, gathering fruit from trees that had once seemed impossible to grow there. She gently reminded him that years earlier nearly everyone had measured value by appearances. Weston quietly answered that people often judged both land and human beings before giving either the chance to heal. Clara no longer skipped meals so her son could eat. Instead, she welcomed visitors into a modest farmhouse filled with fresh bread, vegetables, laughter, and gratitude. She often watched Weston speaking with young aspiring farmers and realized the greatest harvest was not growing from the soil anymore. It was growing inside people who finally believed difficult beginnings did not have to decide impossible endings. The county eventually replaced the old sign near the entrance road. Where it once identified an abandoned hillside, a new wooden marker simply read, Resilience Ridge. Visitors smiled at the name, but Weston privately remembered the cruel laughter that had once echoed across those same rocks. He carried no bitterness toward those memories because forgiveness had freed him long before success ever did. Before we reach the end of this journey, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment sharing a time when perseverance, kindness, or forgiveness helped you overcome something others believed was impossible. Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. As another bright afternoon settled gently across the thriving hillside, Weston stood overlooking terraces alive with fruit, grain, flowers, birds, and grateful families working together. The same rocks that had once symbolized failure now protected rich living soil beneath them. The same land people had discarded had become the safest place in the county when both drought and flood tested every farmer's courage. Weston finally understood that life's greatest blessings often arrive disguised as burdens because they quietly invite us to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. The hill had never changed his destiny by itself. It had changed the person he became while refusing to surrender. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May this story remind us all that people, just like forgotten land, should never be judged by first impressions, because patience, compassion, and unwavering hope can transform what the world calls worthless into something truly extraordinary.